Recording. Okay, so I'm Saskia Coburn, co-director of The Hidden Artist and director of Sasolo, Arts and Development. Been a consultant in this space 30 years, I think, something like that. Long time. And I'm here with Yana, who's going to say hello, and we are going to talk about secrets and lies. Secrets and lies in the funding and creative development sector.
Yeah. We feel really aware that there's a lot of people who feel like they're on the outside of what we do, on the outside of arts development and that kind of thing. So here's a moment to contextualize. My name is Yana Dzedze, and I'm a writer and consultant at Sasolo under the wing of the incredible Saskia. Um, and yeah, we're on this journey of having co-founded The Hidden Artist. I feel really grateful to be on this joint venture together. And we're wanting to provide accessible ways into kind of industry language and the business of arts that can feel so distant and so difficult to navigate or understand. And I think that when the confused mind says no, and arts jargon or business jargon can feel confusing, then it can often translate internally to like, oh, I don't belong here, or this isn't for me, or I don't have a place in the kind of funding or professional sector. Like, I'm just going to stay here and do my own little
Or
niche
even what
thing,
professional
right?
is, right? We meet so many people, and I'm always saying that to clients, aren't I? And to each other, like redefining what professional is, looks like, feels like, because we just perceive it in a really 19th century kind of suited and booted kind of way. And actually, that a lot of that isn't professionalism, a lot of that is extractionism, if that's a word. It's not really about that. Being professional, just for me, means sustaining yourself financially by the work that you create rather than having to do it as a sideline. So, really demystifying that idea of professional being otherly to what you already are. The only separation about professional is money, right? So it's, yeah, roots to money. And we're really aware whenever we decide to talk to each other about this stuff, there's so much to say, so much to explain. And I suppose it's worth saying that the hidden artist came out of meeting literally hundreds of clients a year, thousands of clients over the years, who, when we meet them to get them money to write funding strategies and applications, and not just that, doing deck development and web, but whatever the work we're doing, so often we're having to like hothouse their understanding of this very opaque world. And so the hidden artist is about having a slowness to that approach, right? So that there is time to understand what you might not even know you don't know, or just get your ducks in a row, or understand perhaps that you already know loads of it. You just need confidence, shared peer kind of experience to get going, right?
It's crazy, isn't it? Like how often the answer is right in front of someone. And
Yeah.
I'll be in a session with a client and they're like, oh, how do I develop partners? Or, what does evaluation mean? And I'm like, it's the things that you're already doing. It's just
Yeah.
making yourself cognizant of those things and putting it into your writing.
Practicing them, frameworking them, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But, well, not but, and so we're going to talk about three things in this first little session. We're going to talk about the four P's, which used to be the three P's, and then I added one, so there's now four P's. We're going to talk about alignment, under alignment, and we're going to talk about inclusion by design and how people can get nervous around EDIB, IDEA, however you terming it, inclusion and diversity, knowing what that is and knowing how to center it in your work as a bonus for all, rather than seeing it as something separate to your work or something that you don't understand. So let's dive in, shall we? I'm going to screen share it.
Yeah, go for it.
So get to see my 3 million tabs open. So the 4 Ps: partners, peers, participants, and purse. So what are these? Well, they're kind of self-explanatory in terms of, as nouns, as things, as what they are. And worth contextualizing this a little bit. It's one of our early modules. Module A in the Hidden Artist Journey on our platform. Sign up now. That is about building relationships. And I guess the first 3, partners, peers, and participants, are obvious relationships to have. But I've added purse because you also have to have a relationship with money. And a lot of people have a really challenging relationship with money, especially grassroots artists. We're just so used to, there's so many tropes around art being sold for nothing. We can normalize that, we internalize it. We're not good at asking for enough. How many clients do we sit with and I'm like, you haven't paid yourself, or you're not paying yourself anywhere near enough? But also there is an audience and sometimes sector expectation, sometimes, not always, that people work for less than they should be doing because it's fun to do art. So why would we pay you lots of money? Okay, so partners. I think partners is a really wide, all-encompassing term that actually means anyone and everyone that you work with artistically, logistically, developmentally. And when I say developmentally, that can mean audiences, it can mean venues, it can mean referral groups, it can mean public sector, private sector. Like, it's such a massive swathe of people. And in some ways, it's kind of the mega heading here, right? For the next 2, like peers and participants to an extent could sit underneath that because they're all your partnerships. But I suppose here we're thinking about, okay, if we thought about the main partners sort of groups or cohorts we work in, Yana, we'd be thinking like venues. Where are you putting on your work? We think a lot about pipeline partners. Like, what are those? Like referring and developing audiences or areas of interest or expertise, mentorship, adding value, connecting you to the local, national, international ecology, which is just the space that you're working in. So I don't know, if you're a theatre practitioner, it's an easy one. You need a venue to put your work on, probably. But let's say you're doing a piece of work, a piece of verbatim theatre, or a piece of sort of socially engaged theatre where you have target audiences. Let's say you want to work with Global South, or you want to work with disabled young women, or you want to work, who is your work for? These kind of social partners can help you. If you're going to do a piece of work that considers disability, you might have your own expertise, but you might want to develop an audience that really aligns and resonates with your work. Where are you going to go? Well, you can go to your venue, you can go to your own networks. You might also want to go out to advocacy groups or support groups that work with families that have disabled young people involved. That kind of idea, right?
Mm.
What you want to say about that bit?
I just think that as well, sometimes in development we can again feel like this is far reaching, and like how do I connect with these partners? How do I develop these partners? More often than not, you will already have relationships that are like either directly your partners or relationships that can give you an introduction or a way in. And this might be that there's a relationship with a venue that you go to often, and you kind of say hi to the guys that manage it, but you don't really know them, but you would have a line with them. You could go in and say hi and show your face, or pop them an email or follow up. There's lots of different ways to access. And I think that sometimes, again, that thing of people feeling out of reach or seeming far away, like dispelling that myth and going, that's just a person on the other side who's part of running something, who has their own agenda, and hopefully what you've got going on is like a win-win situation for what they've got going on. And you
Have
reach
value.
out and people connect. Like,
Have
yeah,
value. Venues need work, and spaces need artists, and
mm,
it's quid pro quo. You're not doing anyone a favor here. You're making connections that are mutually valuable. Um, I think I get asked that question so much. Well, how do I go about contacting someone? And the simple answer is contact them.
yeah,
Just contact them. Like, what's the worst that can happen here? And it's very normal for artists to make approaches, especially if you're working in a funded area where you don't know if you've got the money yet. Should I reach out? Just be really straight with people. I'm applying for funding, or I'm planning an event. I do, I don't mean to be facetious here. We totally know that it can be difficult to plan a lot in advance. Some venues, getting guarantees and getting into that depth of things is more complicated. So we're not being like, oh, it's just dead easy, but we are saying just put one foot in front of the other, I suppose. And I
yeah.
suppose I am also saying, if I'm playing bad cop or kind of the mother in this situation, like you do have to do this. Like you have to reach out. Creating your beautiful work is one thing, visibilizing your work is the next step. You have to make these connections in order for the business side of your art to function for you. It is your responsibility to
I love
start.
that bad cop and mother went together. So satisfying.
um, and I guess what I guess that leads nicely to peers. Like that is what really helps you here is who do you work with? What's the common experience, the shared difficulties, the struggles, the successes? Like if you're a musician, what are other musicians doing? And I would just so encourage people to not be in silos. Again, the hidden artists, that's what we do in this space, right?
Yeah,
People from all different genres, all different modalities, sitting in a space together, sharing their experiences, sharing what works, sharing what's difficult. It's so universal. All of our support calls, our coffee calls already, we're just seeing that whether you're in South Africa, whether you're in London, whether you're black, whether you're white, male, female, there's just such a universality to this. And
yeah,
our strength is in your support structures. If you're a visual artist, what's the other visual artist next to you doing? If you're a musician, if you're a dramaturge, if you're a writer, writers are so isolated. Like how are other people doing this? And yeah, learning communally. And they are so important to your work. If you don't know what's going on, you can't be part of it, right?
100%.
Participants. I mean, maybe the most valuable P if you don't have an audience.
God, yeah,
You know,
definitely.
what are you doing without anyone to show your beautiful work too? So maybe it's the first thing you need to start thinking about when you're designing your work programs, doing the thinking. Who's this for? Of
Mm.
course, it's for you. All artists create for themselves as well as others, but who is it for? Put that right at the beginning. Like we speak to lots of artists and I say, well, who's it for? And they say everyone. And of course, that's true. But funders need more granularity, and actually, so do you as an
Yeah.
artist. Like, who is it for? Because it's rarely for everyone, unless it's, I don't know, Disney. Even then, people don't like Disney. So, who likes your work? What values does your work inherit and contain? Who are you speaking to? Who does it resonate with? Who's your tribe? And where am I going to find them? And then how am I going to reach them? And that's when obviously PR and marketing comes in, but that only comes in once you know who they are. And also the best form of PR and marketing is outreach. You going out and connecting with the kind of audiences that you hopefully already know like your work or imagine will based on what you witness around you.
Yeah.
And I need to say about that.
I think another thing that comes to mind for me when it's audiences and communities and participants as well is that we can buy into this idea that bigger is better and more is better. But the experience, there's a sweet spot in every experience. If you're in a situation where there's 5 people, there's a sweet spot where 5 people is like perfect. There's a sweet spot at 50. There's a sweet spot at, 100, at 1,000. And it's not necessarily about quantity. I would go for quality before you go for quantity. Yes, there's an element in quantity, but I think the more that you feel into that qualitative element of like, who is it really for? If it was for just 5 people, who would those 5 people be? Would it really be anyone? Would it be absolutely anyone? Probably not. You probably have a sense of what the sweet spot would be at 5, which would indicate what the sweet spot might be at 10 or 20 or up and up and up. And so, like,
If
I think thinking through that lens can also sometimes be helpful.
and I do again, I'm going to be mom. I think if you are just creating work for you, fabulous. If you're creating work for external consumption, you do have a responsibility if you want to be sustained. If you want to make money, don't we all, to live, helpful, to pay the bills, then you have a responsibility to understand who your audience are, who your tribe are, because otherwise, they're not going to find you unless you make yourself visible to them. So PR and marketing can feel like a great big grey splodge, but actually the key to it is, who am I trying to reach? Who does my work align with? And that is about values. I think, like, what am I speaking about? It doesn't matter what your form is. You could be writing a novel, you could be doing a one-hander, you could be, whatever you're doing, music. Yeah, find your tribe, and then try and the responsibility you have is to understand how they like to be communicated with, and then buy your PR and your marketing accordingly, right? Or do your outreach, or get out there yourself.
100%.
Both peepers.
Love it, love it, love it.
Whereas funding and finance, I mean, this is an entire like 3-year conversation all of its own. So just going to speak very briefly to it here. And I'm only going to speak about it in this context in terms of your relationship to it, because how to get money, like I say, is another conversation. But the first thing you have to do is believe that you're worthy of it and put yourself in the way of it, and think about value. Just talked about values, but think about value. Have an understanding that expertise is not the same as time. So your time sold for an evening doing a performance isn't your value. Your value is, it took me 25 years to learn how to deliver that 1 hour of amazing content to you in one evening. Remember to value yourself. It's a mindset shift before, and we will have other conversations about this, understanding how to technically approach getting some funding or bootstrapping, i.e., making yourself more commercially viable, and then learning how to play the game between those two. And most artists and creatives and cultural sector people will probably be towing a line somewhere between a bit of both. It's very hard to make yourself financially sustainable commercially unless you're incredibly successful. Most people need to rely, don't like that word, rely on funding, or I would say access funding, right? That they are warranted, because we all want to consume the creativity that people produce. So yeah, like, dial back in for more on funding and finance. But before all of that, before putting pen to paper, as it were, have a value conversation with yourself and make sure that you're ready to get money. And also, yeah, be aware that getting money can be an interesting journey. Once you've got it, responsibilities change. True.
So true. And like, that's a huge thing that I've really learned. I've learned how to write great applications, right? And we know how to magic people money. And also that line that you put in a box saying that this thing will happen ends up being someone's responsibility, boots on the ground, to deliver the project. And I've managed projects as well since coming into this space, and you learn that actually those lines, they have weight, and there's resistance, and you think, oh, we'll just get 10 people to write a review. Will you now? Okay, how?
Yeah,
How? Like, oh, we'll just get people to give feedback. How? What if they're busy and they don't send the feedback? Or, we'll just,
that's the
budgets, writing out a budget and then realizing that that becomes a conversation. Well, this is how much that I have. Like, there's a real world implication to
responsibility.
developing these skills.
And that's the responsibility of money, especially if you're asking someone else for money. I mean, you're always asking someone else for money. If it's an audience, you're asking them to buy a ticket or buy a record, or whatever it is. But if you're asking a funder, public, private sector, trust and foundation, NDA, RDA, whoever they are, you're making a contract with someone to deliver something. And I think because the creative sector is so chronically underfunded, there's an irony, there's a terrible irony in there, is that, and that's why for me the first thing is value yourself, because you have to value yourself enough to know that you should be paid and you should be paid properly, but you should also hold yourself accountable for the money that you receive from the public purse or whatever. And so don't oversell, right? Like, so many people in a really earnest way come in promising the earth. Yeah, and then you get yourself into all kinds of difficulties. Don't want to go too far down this road, because this is
Yeah.
right? This is like a can of worms we could open and be here for days. So I think in this context, in the 4Ps context, value, having a good, positive, but responsible relationship with money, what you're worth, but also what you receive and how to disseminate it. Okay, let's move on.
Ooh.
What are we going to talk about next?